Welcome everyone. I'm Kathleen Humsky, Vice President of the Menasha Historical Society. Thank you for joining us today as we tell the story of the many Irish men and women who helped create the city of Menasha. Because we'd like the program to go on without interruption, we kindly ask that you silence your cell phones at this time. We're very grateful to Tom Van Lieshout for researching and writing today's presentation. This year, Menasha is celebrating its sesquicentennial, its 150th birthday. We thank the library staff for partnering with us during this celebratory year. We'd also like to thank Nicholas Jevney, President of the Menasha Historical Society. Nick's technological expertise gives us assurance that these historical presentations will be preserved for many decades to come. Maybe today's program will be shown during Menasha's 200th birthday in 2074. Now I'll turn the program over to Tom Van Lieshout, a longtime contributor to the Menasha Historical Society.
Thank you, Kathy, and I'd also like to welcome you to our presentation this afternoon. It was a pleasure researching and now presenting the story, the Irish influence on the city of Menasha and the village of Fox Crossing. I've lived in this area over 60 years, and I've seen evidence of the Irish impact in our area, but I really never understood the specific details of that influence. I grew up on Doty Island in the 60s and graduated from St. Patrick's Grade School. My 8th grade class, we had a MacDonald, an O'Connell, and a McCarriger. But we also had a Kabinski, a Rotzenberg, and a Van Linn. I always wondered, why was St. Pat's called the Irish Parish? 25 years later, my son played soccer at Ohauser Park on Irish Road. In that area, there were roads called Grimes, McGann, Kerwin, O'Leary, and Dublin Trail. I was unaware of the significance of those names. Then last summer, a friend asked me to look into the history of their home on Leary Road. That set me on a path that opened my eyes. Today, let us tell you about some of the things that I had learned. To set the stage, most of our discussion today will be in the 19th century, specifically around and after 1840. Historically, in 1840, this whole total area was called the village of Neenah. In 1853, the village of Menasha was incorporated, and in 1874, it became the city of Menasha, as we celebrate its 100th anniversary this year, 150th anniversary this year. The town of Menasha came into existence in 1856. It became Fox Crossing in 2016. And in 1875, the village of Clayton was established. Keeping the locations and these dates straight will be a little difficult. So today, to be less confusing, we will simply call it Menasha. For those of you unfamiliar with Menasha, we'll be concentrating most of our discussion in two areas. First, the plot of land in blue, 3 miles west of Menasha and near the new Neenah High School. Approximately between Irish and Clayton Roads and the Appleton Airport and Winchester Road. The second area, circled in red, was called the Island back in the 1840s. Today we know it as Doty Island. This afternoon, we'll present the story in several sections. What is Ireland and what happened around 1850? The Irish community and the Fox, Wisconsin Waterway Project. The Irish colony and the establishment of the church community. And finally, the farming community and prominent families. We'll begin today with a little background for context. What is Ireland? What happened in that country? And how did the Irish find their way to Menasha? To introduce Ireland to you, we have the former Chief Advisor to the President of Ireland. From her home in Dublin, Mary has pre-recorded her portion for us. Born in Little Chute, Mary graduated from St. Mary's High School in 1977 and St. Catherine University in St. Paul in 1982. For 5 years, she was in Africa working as a nutritionalist with the refugees from the war-torn Mozambique. In 1986, she moved to Ireland and has lived there for 38 years. Mary holds dual citizenship, currently living in Dublin, as do her 3 children. Due to her extensive human rights work, in 2012, Mary became Chief Advisor to the current President of Ireland, Michael Daniel Higgins. Presently, Mary is the Deputy CEO of Ireland's largest humanitarian agency, GOAL. If you're wondering, no, we really don't have that much pull. You see, Mary is my cousin, Mary Van Lieshout. Now, from Dublin, Ireland, in her Irish rugby jersey, my cousin and Ireland's Deputy CEO, GOAL, Mary Van Lieshout.
Thank you, Cuz, and welcome, Menasha, from Dublin, Ireland. I was honored when the Menasha Historical Society asked me to introduce Ireland to you today. Let me start with a simple explanation of Ireland. Ireland is an island nation on the westernmost edge of Europe, west of Great Britain. The capital is Dublin, and birthplace of writers like Oscar Wilde and home of Guinness beer. Dubbed the Emerald Island for its lush landscapes, medieval castles dot the countryside. The 32,500 square mile island has a population of 5.1 million. It's similar in size and population to the state of Indiana. The Celtic religion had a major influence on Ireland in the 5th century. Since the conversion to Christianity, Roman Catholicism has been the island's principal religion. Today, 4/5 of the Republic's population is Roman Catholic, and the country's patron saint is St. Patrick. Ireland is also renowned for tales of tiny leprechauns with pots of gold, and St. Patrick's use of the 3-leaved shamrock as a symbol for the Christian Trinity. An independent nation now, however, it was part of the United Kingdom in the 1800s and governed by the UK Parliament from London. To give you an idea of what it was like back then, let's take a look at what life looked like in Ireland in the 19th century. In the early 1800s, Ireland was made up of many small farms. Most of the lands were rented to tenants by landlords. The landlords owned large tracts of land, but often did not live on their property. The population and tenant farmers relied heavily on the potato as a source of food. Being tenant farmers and beholden to England, they were contracted to export produce to England. An 1841 census found Ireland was the second most densely populated country in Europe, with a population of 8.2 million. In 20 years, the population had exploded from 6.2 million in 1821. The census also found 15% of the people lived in towns with a population of more than 2,000. Half the families in rural areas lived in windowless mud cabins, most with no furniture other than a stool. This period was marked by horrible poverty and poor living conditions. The lower left is a replica of a Class 4 house. Mud cabins were the homes of the most vulnerable classes in society. The Census Commissioner reported that nearly half of the families of the rural population were living in the lowest state. They then concluded that Ireland, being solely an agricultural country, did not have the means of employing the increasing population. Even though things sounded tough for the Irish, things would turn much worse.
In 1845, things changed drastically in Ireland. That year, a mold caused a destructive plant disease. It spread rapidly throughout Ireland. The infestation ruined up to 1/2 of the potato crop that year, and 3/4 of the crops over the next 7 years. The tenant farmers of Ireland relied heavily on the potato for a source of food. We know it as the potato famine. To make things worse, England made them continue exporting the other crops to the mainland, even though the Irish were suffering. This is how Wikipedia explained the Irish potato famine.
The Great Famine, also known within Ireland as the Great Hunger and outside Ireland as the Irish Potato Famine, was a period of starvation and disease in Ireland lasting from 1845 to 1852 that set up a historical social crisis which subsequently had a major impact on Irish society and history as a whole. The crop failures were caused by late blight, a disease that destroys both the leaves and the edible roots of the potato plant. The most severely affected areas were in the western and southern parts of Ireland, where the Irish language was dominant. The worst year of the famine was 1847, which became known as Black 47. During the Great Hunger, roughly 1 million people died and more than 1 million more fled the country, causing the country's population to fall by 20 to 25%. Some towns, the population fell as much as 67%. The period of civil unrest that followed until the end of the 19th century is referred to as the Land War. Between 1845 and 1855, at least 2.1 million people left Ireland, primarily on packet ships, but also on steamboats, in the greatest exoduses from a single island in history.
The famine and the resulting migration, coupled with the civil unrest, had a drastic impact on its population. By 1891, the Irish population had slipped to under 5 million, and by 1931, it dropped to just over 4 million. It stayed around that level until the 1960s, when the population began to rise again. In 2022, the population was 5.1 million, the highest on record since that 1841 census. Remember, in 1841, the population was 8.2 million. As you can see by the map on the right, the Irish migrated throughout the world. However, most to the United States and to Canada, settling in the East Coast cities with major ports. The Irish were a unique immigration group. They came in great numbers. They were Catholic, poor, and unskilled. At times, they met with conflict as their poverty and Catholicism was seen by the locals as a threat to the established order. Boston was an easy port to reach. By 1850, the Irish made up 26% of Boston's population. Many took low-paying work and found themselves living in the slums. By 1860, 95,000 Irish were living in Philadelphia, making the Irish the largest single immigrant population in the city. However, they met with early resistance. In 1844, riots broke out, lives were lost, and Catholic churches were burned. Over 900,000 Irish entered the ports of New York. By 1855, the Irish comprised 1/3 of the city's total population. In New York City, they entered the workforce at the bottom of the occupational ladder, taking on menial work and dangerous jobs, declined by others. Many became employed on large projects. The Irish immigrants became one of the primary builders of the Central Pacific Railroad, the Brooklyn Bridge, and the Erie Canal. Migration to Canada was also significant. At the height of Black 47, 110,000 left Ireland for the ports of Quebec, St. John, and Halifax. Canada was overwhelmed and struggled to provide shelter and medical care for them. Many were sick. Poor conditions and overcrowding on the ships bred illnesses like typhus. In Black 1847, 1,400 Irish refugees died in Kingston alone. A tough road, yes. But there was no turning back now. They needed to keep moving forward.
Unlike other immigrant groups, the Irish did not move immediately westward after arriving in the United States. They were more likely than any other groups to move from state to state in search of available land for farming or work possibilities. The Union Pacific Railroad hired European immigrants, especially Irish, from the westward expansion of their rail lines. In May of 1869, Irish workers completed the project of the Union Pacific. In Promontory Summit, Utah, they met up with the Chinese immigrants working for the Central Pacific Railroad Company, thus completing the Transcontinental Railway. As time went on, many communities began developing plans to help the immigrant process. Utah set up a tract of 100,000 acres for the establishment of an Irish colony. Once all of the water rights were secured, the immigrants began to flow into the state. 2,000 immigrants settled in Virginia. Others flocked to Florida, Iowa, Minnesota, and throughout the United States. During this time, Wisconsin had abundant government land for sale and promoted its availability. Hoping to get more Irish to come to the state, community leaders created the Irish Immigrant Aid Society. In newspapers and other advertisements, they wrote, "Come to Wisconsin, find a peaceful and happy home." The Milwaukee area and southwest portion of the state were two major areas of Irish immigration in Wisconsin. Settling primarily along the Milwaukee Lakeshore districts, in 1850, the Irish made up 14% of Milwaukee's population. The southwestern corner of the state, they settled in communities named Irish Valley, Irish Ridge, and Irish Hollow. Cedarburg had a settlement called New Dublin. Early settlements also started in Prairie du Chien, Patch Grove, and Bloomington. Others moved north to find work in northern lumber camps. Some immigrants obtained government jobs on railway lines and building dams and canals. Brown County and Shawano County were secured land for Irish colonies to work. Portage also had secured land specifically for colony to work on the Wisconsin Fox Canal Project. Irish immigrants were slowly coming to Menasha. One such family found a boarding house on Doty Island. Born in Ireland, Thomas and Martha Strange moved to Menasha in 1852, just after their son John was born. Menasha will come to know John Strange very well. The family found it was not easy for newcomers. They sensed a tremendous gulf that existed between people. At age 10, for 2 cents an hour, John worked at the Menasha Pail Company. He worked there through his teen years. He was a true self-made man, as his family had no social standing nor family money to help him on his ambitions like many of his associates did. John attended Beloit College and began as a school teacher in Rock County, then a grocery clerk in Minneapolis. He also managed a retail lumber yard for 2 years in Iowa. In 1889, Strange moved back to Wisconsin and established a sawmill in Menasha. In 1891, the John Strange Company was incorporated, making brown paper for grocery bags and lunch bags. The business lasted for 78 years. In 1969, it was sold to the Menasha Corporation. John was elected the 21st Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin in 1908. Here is John's recollection of early life as a young boy growing up on the island.
My mind reaches back to the days when we lived in a 3-roomed, rough-board shanty built at the very river's edge, just at the north approach to Doty's Island from the Menasha side. In the high water seasons, the water came into our house and stayed very often for several days at a time. Doty's Island was a famous and favored haunt for the several tribes of Indians who had for years hunted and fished at this most lavishly supplied ground, and many a night the room in which we children slept had every available foot of its floor space occupied by sleeping red men and squaws with their young ones.
John is an example of an individual that was able to persevere and to give back to his community. In 1836, the state of Wisconsin set aside land and certain sections along the Fox River corridor. It was to provide land grants in return for work on the construction of dams, locks, and canals. A patent deed of 160 acres was provided for their service on the Fox and Wisconsin River project. West of Menasha, there was a section of land set aside in the area now known in the villages of Fox Crossing and Clayton. This will later become known as the Irish Colony. We will discuss this area in much greater detail later. Work on the river dams began in De Pere in 1836. The Irish workers were sought after in Portage, Green Bay, Appleton, and Kaukauna for their work on the Fox River project. In 1854, 100 Irish laborers were hired to work on the Menasha portion of the project. Let's take a look at this project and why it was so important.
The average immigrant took 7 years to get to Wisconsin. Many of the Irish went from state to state to find work and a place to call home. In 1850, Menasha had the Fox River Improvement Project focused on building a dam and lock system. They needed the labor force for this large endeavor. 3 individuals will play a role in the process of bringing the Irish families to Menasha. First was the founder of the Bank of Menasha, Henry Hewitt. On Doty Island, Hewitt Street is named after him. The other 2 were Curtis Reed, founder of Menasha, and Governor James Doty. Reed and Doty, in 1850, were part of a partnership that began construction on the Menasha Dam, Canal, and locks. For reference, pictured here are the specific locations of the Menasha Dam, the canal, and the locks. Kathy will take us through the next phase of the immigrant story by the immigrants finding and homesteading in Menasha. First, she'll focus on the importance of the Fox River and why it needed to be tamed.
When the first settlers arrived in Menasha, they were impressed with the amount of water power they saw in the Fox River. If they were to receive and to send goods, it would be necessary to harness the river and use the lakes for transportation. The U.S. military also wanted an efficient way to transport troops and munitions through the vast virgin forests. Both envisioned a gateway to the Great Lakes and beyond, similar to the Erie Canal in New York. Grist mills were beginning to be built throughout the United States. The Menasha settlers saw an opportunity to build their own mills. In its current state, transportation was nearly impossible. The current was too swift, and the drop from Menasha to Green Bay of 164 feet was the same vertical drop as the drop in Horseshoe Falls in New York. In 1835, territorial legislation began discussion of waterway improvements. Companies began investing, and upon statehood, Wisconsin made grants and other funding available to build ways to harness this energy. In the 1840s, dams began being constructed and power generated on the Fox. In 1850, a dam was built at the northern end of Lake Winnebago at Menasha. It slowed the flow of water from Lake Winnebago, and it raised the water levels in Lake Butimore and Winnebago 3 feet. The energy created by this power allowed the forward-thinking Menasha business community to begin building for the future. The Oshkosh Democrat reported on June 7, 1850, that, quote, Menasha is progressing rapidly with the canal. The dam, a fine substantial structure, is completed, unquote. The article later stated the following.
At Menasha, the canal around the rapids is about 3/4 of a mile in length, extending from the North Branch to Little Butimore Lake. The excessive wet weather has slowed down the work, but it is well ahead of schedule. If weather permits, the canal will be completed this season, but not the locks. There is a substantial dam at the head of the canal, 500 feet long, capable of supplying water sufficient to drive all machinery that can be placed on the bank of the river. Already there are 6 sawmills, a grist mill, an iron foundry, and other machinery. All of this in a town of 1,200 inhabitants that 2 years ago was mostly land and unbroken forest.
Large boats, however, were still restricted down the river as the lower Fox had not been dredged and locks had not been built. That same summer, work languished as the sale of the land grants fell off. With money running out and the Menasha Canal only partially completed, Curtis Reed abandoned his contract and stopped production. Other projects along the Fox River were failing. Work was not being completed, and the state was concerned. In 1853, Governor Farwell, since the enterprise was financially unable to survive, proposed it must be incorporated into a new company. The state passed the proposal, and the project would continue under a new investment group, the Fox and Wisconsin River Improvement Company. Wisconsin then provided 680,000 acres of land and $2 million to the enterprise in order to complete the project. Henry Hewitt became the construction manager with the Fox Improvement Company. Henry, who was born in Middlesex, England in 1814, came to America and settled in Chicago. He found work on a construction crew building the Illinois Canal. Henry then moved to Kaukauna and worked on both the Kaukauna and the Appleton dams. That is when he received his promotion in this new company. During his tenure on the Appleton and Kaukauna projects, he had a large force of Irish under him. One of their roles was to cut and haul all of the timber for the dams and the canals. In 1854, James Doty was awarded Hewitt the contract to rebuild and complete the Menasha portion. This included overseeing the excavation of the canal, building the crib work in the front of the dam, and building the original wooden bridge at Taco Street. Once in charge, Hewitt hired 100 Irish laborers to complete the work in Menasha, 3 years after the construction had stopped. The labor supplied by the Irish immigrants was essential to the completion of the dam, canal, and locks. With that labor, in 1856, the first boat was able to travel the entire system, passing through Menasha on its way to Green Bay. Once completed, the results were immediate. They built 17 locks and 12 dams along the 39-mile stretch from Menasha to Green Bay. By the late 1850s, the Twin Cities had 8 operating grist mills, producing 50,000 barrels of flour worth $250,000. The Twin Cities were the second largest producer of flour in the state of Wisconsin, second only to Milwaukee. With the local wheat and plentiful water power, by 1880, production from 15 mills surpassed $2.1 million. The first hydroelectric power plant in the world to sell electricity opened on the Fox River near Appleton. On September 30th, 1882, Appleton Pulp Mill's Vulcan Street plant became the first to generate electricity by combining hydropower sites with one of Edison's new electrical generators. As our founding fathers saw, harnessing the awesome power of the Fox River was essential to the city's growth.
Now that the Irish were settling in Menasha, they began to build their lives in the new land, keeping many of the homeland's traditions. We'll cover this portion in 3 sections: the establishment of the Irish colony, the establishment of the Catholic mission, and ending with the establishment of the Catholic cemeteries. Again, 3 individuals had influence on the immigrants' quest to build a new life in Menasha and their ability to maintain some of those Irish traditions. Henry Hewitt will be again involved. The second man to assist was also living on the island, Laughlin McKinnon, a captain in the British Royal Navy who had a large horse stud farm, pictured right, which included importing England's best bred horses. The farm was located on the northeast corner of Doty Island. Lastly, also living on the island was the Reverend O.P. Clinton. He was known as the minister to the pioneers in the Fox River Valley. Clinton, a Protestant minister, was involved in the development of the Congregationalist, the Methodist, and the Presbyterian churches in the Twin Cities. Jim will cover this portion of the presentation.
Okay. These pictures are of different early Irish settlements throughout the nation, including Menasha. Traditionally, the Irish were clannish, banding together in colonies. Also, very deeply religious, they belonged to the Catholic Church. Menasha's Irish laborers were no different. As mentioned, in 1836, the state of Wisconsin set aside land in the Menasha area for land grants in return for their work on the Menasha Dam project. They received a patent deed of 160 acres. The Irish were the first significant ethnic group in the Fox Cities area, and by the mid-1850s, it was the largest foreign-born group in Winnebago County. By 1857, the Irish settlement was referred to as the Irish colony. On a side note, years later, this practice was formally enacted by Congress to help settle in the western lands. The Homestead Act of 1862 provided the 160 acres of federal land to any claimant willing to live on the land and improve their plot in cultivating that land. The Irish quickly cleared woods for homes, farmland, and for schools. Farming life was a tough manual work, with no modern equipment to make it more efficient. Unpredictable weather, fires, and diseases created additional frustrations, but also built a very strong will. The Twin Cities religious world in the 1840s was very similar to the religious world throughout the United States. Reverend O.P. Clinton was the major religious leader in the area. Through his great efforts, by 1848, Neenah and Menasha had several denominations of the Protestant religion. The religious communities were being formed by the immigrants' country of origin, but also very influenced by the Reverend's beliefs. In so, Reverend Clinton was not supportive of Roman Catholics, and that affected their development in the Twin Cities. By the time the Irish immigrants had settled in Menasha, there were no Catholic churches for them to celebrate in, so they took things into their own hands. In 1848, a log church was erected in the Irish colony to serve 20 Catholic families. Father Farinassi was assigned to assist the church. St. Malachi Mission was located near the edge of the John Fitzgibbon Farm on Clayton Road. The mission remained in use until 1857. Today, a historical marker, encircled left, marks the general location. In 1853, Captain McClellan offered the use of his land on Doty Island for the Order of Servants of Mary to build a Catholic church. The Servites were charged to service the poor and the homeless. Later that year, construction began on the first Catholic church in the Twin Cities. In 1857, Reverend Heine, Bishop of Milwaukee, dedicated the church to St. Charles Borromeo. The mission in the Irish colony was then abandoned. 7 years later, with 80 members, Captain McKinnon sold the land to the church for $1. In 1867, the congregation had grown to 275 families, with 250 families of Irish or German descent. The German-speaking Catholics of Menasha, wishing to hear Mass in their own language with the support of the parish, separated to build their own church. That church, dedicated to St. Mary, Our Lady of Assumption, continues to serve parishioners today. On March 2nd, 1882, St. Charles was destroyed by fire caused by a defective chimney. Many parishioners declined to contribute to rebuild because the diocese did not own the church or the property. On May 15th, 1882, the Servites deemed both the church and property to the Diocese of Green Bay. Plans to rebuild began. Many parishioners mortgaged their farms and homes to raise money for the project. This new church was dedicated to and named St. Patrick's on July 5th, 1883. St. Patrick's is still serving parishioners today. The impact of those first Irish settlers was profound to the Catholic community, and we were able to take advantage of their contribution. The state historic marker for St. Malachi and the Fox Irish Cemetery is pictured on the left and is located on North Clayton Avenue. It is inscribed, quote, "Near here is the lost cemetery of St. Malachi Catholic Church, a mission church of log construction that served the local Irish community and Catholic Indians," end quote. Next we have the earliest Menasha Catholic graveyard. It is located in the Irish colony and associated with a mission. There are no remaining markers, and the exact location of who was buried there is unknown. The mission was disbanded for a new church on the island, but the cemetery remained for a short time longer. A year after St. Charles was built, Michael Hogan, owner of the farm in the Irish settlement, purchased 3 acres of land on Green Bay Road from Henry Hewitt. He wanted to build a larger cemetery for the Irish and German Catholic settlers. In 1870, he sold the property to St. Charles Parish for $300. Known as the Old Irish Cemetery, this became St. Patrick's Cemetery, pictured on the right, and is an active cemetery today. The development of the Catholic churches and cemeteries are significant contributions of the immigrants of the Irish in this area and cannot be forgotten.
In the Irish colony, there were over 30 farms, including dairy producing milk, butter, and cheese, grains like wheat, oats, and barley, and fruit orchards. By the turn of the century, many of the Irish families moved on to surrounding areas and sold their farms to German and Scandinavian immigrant families. Today, several of the homesteads from the original colony still stand. Some families kept the properties in the family for generations. We'll take a look at 6 of those families and the contributions they made to the local area, the state, and the world. Kathy will discuss the Fitzgibbon and Hogan's family, Jim, the Kerwin, and the Grimes family, and I'll conclude with the McGann and Gear families.
John Fitzgibbon was born in Clare, Ireland in 1813. Leaving Ireland, he first settled in New York, working on the Erie Canal. John came to Wisconsin through Canada, and he worked as a stonemason. He did work on the Kimberly Brothers' home, located on Wisconsin Avenue in Neenah, upper left. He also did work on buildings at Lawrence University. In Menasha, John worked on government projects. The Menasha Lighthouse, a federal improvement project brought to this area by Congressman Doty, and the building of the Menasha Dam. John was one of the first Irish immigrants to settle here, and his first neighbors were Patrick Garvey, Michael Kerwin, Patrick O'Hare, and Daniel Nugent. In 1848, John claimed his 16-acre property from the federal government for his work on the Fox, Wisconsin River Improvement Project. John settled there with his wife Ellen and their 3 children. As a mason by trade, their home was the only stone house in the Irish tradition and the only salt box barn with an English-style foundation in our area. On John's property, the first Catholic mission and cemetery was established in Menasha. The lower left plaque observes the location of the St. Malachi mission. In 1834, the federal government passed a social program called the, quote, Poor Law, unquote. That new law ensured that the poor were housed in workhouses, clothed, and fed. Children who entered the workhouse would receive some schooling in return for this care, and all would have to work for several hours every day. John was the poor commissioner for the area. He held that job until his death at age 79. In 1883, son James sold the family property. Although the family sold the land, the property still exists today. In the mid-1980s, the picturesque Fitzgibbon farmstead was owned by local historians Sylvia and Don Martin. That was not true for all locations. 130 years after the establishment of the Irish colony, many of the farms and homesteads were being sold or torn down. Then in 1995, the old Irish colony was back in the news. As Menasha was looking to redo American Drive West, the planning committee ran into resistance with local landowners. The planning chief worked with residents to maintain the historical area. This was set up a strong drive to preserve as much as possible. In a 1996 interview, Sylvia said, quote, "We've taken a property that many people wanted to bulldoze down and added $3,000 a year to the tax rolls," unquote. She marveled at the aged orchard of gnarled apple trees in her front yard that continued to sprout apples. As you can see, in 2023, the orchard is still producing apples. In the same article, a neighbor mentioned that she received a call from a doctor who wanted to buy her property. The intent was to tear it down and rebuild a modern structure. Today, the Fitzgibbon Stone House and the farm are on the Wisconsin State List of Historical Places and the National List of Historical Landmark Listings. In 1850, Ed Carroll received 160 acres of land at 1171 Irish Road for his work on the Menasha Dam. In 1858, he sold 120 acres to Michael and Margaret Hogan. Michael was a member of the Wisconsin legislature, serving in the Assembly in 1862 and 1863. Michael replaced city founder Curtis Reed in this position. A mason by trade, he worked with John Fitzgibbon on the Menasha Lighthouse. No longer in existence, it was set in the Menasha Harbor near Jefferson Park. The structure was 20 by 30 feet, 2 stories with ends and a lantern on the southeast corner using a white light. It burned down 30 years after completion and was not rebuilt. Michael was a trustee for the St. Charles Church and, as discussed earlier, bought a plot of land on Green Bay Road to build a cemetery. He sold it to the church, and it later became St. Patrick's Cemetery. In 1870, Michael and partner J.A. Sanford were awarded the contract to repair the Menasha Dam. Michael passed away in 1872, and the parcel of land was sold. Upon his passing, the writer from the Oshkosh paper who knew him during his time as a legislator said that Michael was a warm and a close personal friend.
The Kirwan family was a celebrated family in Ireland, as many were highly educated and displayed great intelligence as priests and lawyers. Several came to America and attained considerable prominence, such as the military career of Michael Kirwan Sr. He was a decorated brigadier general, U.S. Army in the Civil War. His son, also Michael, will find his way to Menasha. Michael Jr. was born in Tipperary County, Ireland in 1815. In 1844, he left Ireland and settled in Canada. He remained there until 1848, when he returned to Ireland and got married to Mary Buckley. The couple came back to America the same year, settled on a large 16-acre farm in Menasha. There they carved a splendid domain out of the forest of hardwoods and made wide use of it into a thrifty fruit farm. As we mentioned earlier, farming life was not easy. As noted in the news articles, the Kirwan family went through trials of their own, but they persevered. 7 children were born to Michael and Mary. The couple lived on the farm until his death in 1901. Michael, one of the first settlers in Winnebago County, helped make the first canal improvements in Menasha. His main responsibility was clearing brush and timber from the lands now occupied by the cities of Neenah, Menasha, and Appleton. Upon his death, son Judge J.C. became the owner of the farm. The family tradition continued as Michael's children will make an impact on the community and on the world. Let's take a look at the lives of his two sons, James C. and Michael. James C. Kerwin was born on a family farm on May 4th, 1850. He attended the University of Wisconsin and graduated from the law department in 1876. First practiced law in Menasha, and then was admitted to the bar on the Circuit Court of Dane County. He won some very important cases. One was a railway bond case in the town of Menasha. In 1875, after a ruthless contest with an opponent favored by the railway and the largest financial influencers in the state, he was, however, elected to the Wisconsin Supreme Court by a huge majority of 14,000 votes. From the Oshkosh Times, December 23, 1902, quote, "For many years, Mr. Kerwin was been recognized as the foremost attorney and one of the best known men in the profession in this section of the state," end quote. Judge Kerwin continued the family tradition of excelling and helping society. Menasha was fortunate to have him as a part of its community. Five years after becoming the Supreme Court judge, at age 30, J.C. married Helen Elizabeth Lawson. In 1885, the couple then built their home on Doty Island. The Kerwin House, 516 East Forest Avenue, is a two-story Queen-style home built of masonry. The daughter Jessie married January 4th, 1908, to Charles B. Clark of the Kimberly-Clark Company. This is a picture of their wedding party in front of the family home. Daughter Grace married John Sensenbrenner. They had one son, James, pictured lower left. He became our United States Congressman in the 5th Congressional District for 42 years. Dr. Michael H. Kerwin obtained a high place in his chosen profession of medicine. To the great grief of his many numerous friends, he was stricken down just as he gained the highest honors in preparation of his life's work. On March 7th, 1891, he died of an acute intestinal disease at the age of 35. The following is a paragraph of Michael's life from an article in The Transactions of the State Medical Society.
Michael was born May 14, 1855, on his father's farm. He graduated from the medical department of the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor in 1876. In 1881, he went to New York and spent a year at the College of Physicians and Surgeons, receiving his second degree from this institution in 1882. In 1887, he went to Europe and remained abroad 2 years, studying in Vienna, Berlin, Hamburg, Prague, and Paris. He read and spoke German and English and acquired a good knowledge of French. Upon his return, he moved to Milwaukee. When the announcement was made that Professor Robert Koch had discovered a cure for consumption, now known as tuberculosis, he departed for Berlin and was able to bring back to Wisconsin the first vial of Koch's lymph. He had lymph sufficient for 800 injections. Over the next several months, he will treat patients at local hospitals. Physicians from all over came to observe the procedure. Only 3 months from his return and the efforts in Milwaukee, he will pass away. There was not a physician in Wisconsin of his age so well informed and so well known.
Menasha's Kerwin family leaves a lasting legacy. From being a part of building an important dam and canal structure to a second generation that practiced law and medicine, and a fourth generation with a long career in civil service. The Grimes family story begins when the family arrived in Boston. Mrs. Margaret Grimes and her children arrived on a boat from Ireland. With daughter Anne and 6 sons, she sent her oldest son Tom to find a place for the family to live in the West. First going to Illinois, then to Indiana, Thomas finally settled in Wisconsin. In Menasha, he found work on the dam project and accepted the land provided. In 1848, he received 160 acres from the government for his work. At that time, the land was valued at $1.25 an acre, or $200. Thomas quickly sat down and penned a letter back to his family in Boston. The original letter was written in Gaelic. Here's a portion of the translated version by his grandson.
May 21, 1849, Neenah, Wisconsin. Dear family, you do not know the trouble I've had. Now I must write this in haste, for the post goes out but once a week. I have traveled much and hard, but I now bought 160 acres of the finest land in America. It's enough for all of us. It's all timbered except 8 acres cleared by the first owner, who lost it because he couldn't make the payments to the state of Wisconsin. I'm putting in potatoes, beans, and corn. There will be plenty for all of us over winter. Now be ye not employed? Come on with ye as fast as ye can, for the state is filling up fast. Convert all but the beds and clothes to gold, for money is very valuable here. Have 4 acres of winter wheat coming fine, was planted last fall by previous owner. Plenty of all. Bring $300. How to get here? Take the Hudson River north to Albany, New York, then the immigrant train to Buffalo, then take steamboat through Lake Erie and Lake Huron and into Lake Michigan, then down the west shore to Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Write when you get this letter and I'll meet you there. Now be I not able to meet you there, take the wagon trail to Fond du Lac and then north to Neenah. It's 70 miles by wagon from Sheboygan to Neenah. When at Neenah, go to Bridie Scanlon's store. She knows where the farm is, about 5 English miles from Neenah. Write as soon as you get this. Address it to Neenah, P.O., to be picked up by me there. See you at Sheboygan or Bridie's in Neenah. Please hurry.
Once the family began immigrating to Menasha, Thomas divided the land for his family to live on. Pictured on the left is Neil Grimes on his property. Thomas's nephew, William Grimes, also settled on the land. He served on the Winnebago County Board for 30 years and the County Board and Bridge Committee. The family started a cheese factory on Neil's location. As you can see with the photo on the right, the property remains today. It is the only property we will discuss today, still owned by the original family. Thomas's sister Anne will marry Michael Murphy. We may not know much about them, but the world will soon know their son John. Let us take a look at John and Murphy's life. Dr. John Benjamin Murphy, an American physician and abdominal surgeon, received his doctorate from Rush Medical College in 1879. In 1897, After a patient with a gunshot injury, he became the first surgeon to outperform biliary tract endoscopy. Multiple eponyms named after him included Murphy sign for the detection of clinical gallbladder hypersensitivity. Dr. Murphy was an advocate of early surgical intervention in appendicitis. William Mayo described him as, quote, the surgical genius of our generation, end quote. The following is an article from the Oshkosh Northwestern.
Dr. John P. Murphy, son of early settlers Michael and Ann Grimes Murphy, had grown up on a farm west of Little Lake Bunamore in the town of Menasha. Dr. Murphy was a vocal dissenter of early surgical practices. He claimed that early operative treatment was the way to save a life. Dr. Murphy's leading contribution to surgery was the development of the Murphy button in 1892. According to the Story of Medicine in Wisconsin, a major surgical obstacle revolved around the problem of how to untie the two open ends of the intestinal tract. Sewing the intestines together was dangerous because often the stitches would not hold or would form scars that blocked the passage. Based on the principle of the dressmaker's snap fastener, the intestinal ends could simply be snapped together using a button. As the ends heated, the buttons would be passed from the body, leaving an unscarred opening the size of the button used. This technique proved to be very successful and was immediately adopted by the prestigious Mayo Clinic. Dr. Murphy continued in his research of surgical procedures, stressing the importance of preoperative procedures in appendicitis, and also worked on gynecological procedures.
What a wonderful contribution to science. The Grimes family was able to grow and contribute to our community and to the world of science.
Peter McGann, born in 1832, Cavan, Ireland, moved to America with his brother Richard. The brothers bought the land on Clayton Avenue. A short time later, next to his brother's place, Peter acquired a property on O'Leary Road. Both properties were purchased from the original owners, and they had received the land from their work on the Menasha Dam. Tonight, we'll focus on Peter's O'Leary Road property. For reference, Ohauser Park is situated in this land. In 1869, Peter married Margaret Kerwin, sister of Dr. Mike and Judge Kerwin. They had 2 boys and 6 girls. The center photo is the original dairy barn built in 1881. It was torn down 100 years later and replaced with a new barn on the right. As mentioned earlier, farming life was tough. Peter had his share of difficulties, as noted in the articles. Fires were always a worry. Also, the McGann's land was not fully suitable for farming. It had many stone piles, holes, and a spring creek running through it, making planting and harvesting a chore. In 1906, Peter passed away, and upon Margaret's passing, the property was given to their son, Peter Jr. He rented the farm out and became a city police officer and worked on the railroad. Peter owned the farm and homestead until his death in 1951. The land was sold soon after. The home played an important part in this presentation. But before I get to this part of it, let me cover one story from Richard's Clayton Avenue property. This is a story of how tight the bond was between the Irish immigrants. In 1886, Richard fell into deep financial stress. Peter's brother-in-law, Judge Kerwin, stepped in and bought the property. The judge let Richard and his family stay in the home. Richard's homestead was sold after his passing. now back to Peter's home on O'Leary Street. This is where the Irish project began. Peter McGann's property is currently owned by Steve and Cindy Otto. Otto's, personal friends of ours, invited Mary and me to a party in their home last summer. During that evening, Cindy asked me to do a little research on the background of their home. They had owned the home since 1973 and knew it was over 150 years old. Once I began the research, I was hooked on the Irish story. The fact that the homestead is still here is one of the reasons why I wanted to show you. Being one of the original structures still standing, I wanted to show how beautiful these homes were. There were significant updates to the building, but some of the features remain. In 1981, they had to tear the barn down and replace it with a similar structure. Steve turned it into an office. During my investigation on the project, there was one question that always stumped me. I could not find information on the family that Ohauser Park was named after. Knowing that Steve had 15 years of being the village park and rec commissioner, I thought I'd ask. He looked up at me with a smile on his face and a twinkle in his eye, and he said, "It's a made-up name." The real estate agent and land developer, Frank Hauser, wanted to make the park represent the Irish heritage, so he revised his family name and the park became Ohauser Park. I want to personally thank Steve and Cindy Otto for help in this presentation. In 1845, Hugh Gear, escaping wars in Ireland, stowed away on a ship that he thought was going to Australia. It turned out that it was bound for Boston. Looking for work, he moved west. In 1855, Hugh took a government loan on a property on Plank Road in Menasha. Hugh and Sybil had 3 children. Son William, in 1882, went further west to become a cowboy. Another son, Charles, took over the family farm. Charles and his wife, Catherine, had 7 children. They bought land across the street from the farm to build their home. Charles established Gear Dairy in 1883, and 10 years later, William returned to Menasha to join his brother on the dairy farm. Over 70 years, the Gear Dairy played an extremely valuable role in the development of Menasha. This dairy became known as the Dairy of Many Firsts for the area. They were the first dairy to make house-to-house deliveries, the first to provide bottled milk, the first to use pasteurization and homogenation, the first to provide half and half milk, half and half cream, the first to add vitamin A and D to their products. The Gear Dairy delivered milk in on a horse-drawn wagon. The bell was used to announce their coming, giving housewives enough time to get their jars ready to pour the milk into. The milk was sold from 3 to 5 cents a quart. The partnership was disbanded in 1903 when William moved the dairy operation to 333 First Street in Menasha. Charles continued supplying the milk to the dairy from the dairy farm. In 1912, the Gear Dairy began bottling milk in round glass containers sealed with paper caps. 3 years later, Wisconsin led the production of milk, cheese, and butter. Most of these products were produced in dairies and factories like the Gears. Through the years, family members continued to operate the plant until it was sold. The decade of the 60s was not kind to local dairies. Due to rising costs, many went out of business or was absorbed by large dairies. The Gear Dairy was no different. In 1967, it was sold to Morning Glory Dairy. The little dairy that began selling milk house to house with horses at the time of the sale was providing milk for vending machines in industry, supplying milk to schools and supermarkets, and wholesaling to smaller dairies. This is another great example of how Irish immigrants fleeing famine and wars can better their lives and produce better lives to the land that brought them in.
What a legacy these Irish immigrants left in Menasha. Before we finish today, I wanted to go back to the original immigrants from the 1840s. All of the first generation Irish immigrants we discussed today, except the Gears and John Strange, are buried in St. Patrick's Cemetery on Green Bay Road. 5 of the original homes or farms are still standing and in use. One property is owned by the original family. The Grimes still hold the home on 2054 Irish Road. We hope that you'll take the time to go out and witness some of Menasha's history. Wow, we took you on a long journey today. I'd like to thank Tom and the whole Van Lieshout family, including Cousin Mary from Ireland. What an honor. Our 2 ghost readers, Mary and Mary Van Lieshout, Tom and Jim's wives. And Tom and Jim for helping present this afternoon. I can't forget our other ghost reader, a close friend and director of the Appleton Historical Society, Tom Sutter. Mr. Sutter was Tom Van Lieshout's history teacher at Menasha High School. Thank you for coming today. We hope you enjoyed the stories, and remember, we have this presentation on our YouTube series for you to watch again or share with family and friends. Thank you to Jan McBride for the delicious treats she has prepared for us. Please be sure to have some before you leave today. And now we'll end this presentation where we started, Dublin, Ireland, for final words from Mary Van Lieshout.
Welcome again from Dublin. I hope you learned a bit about my beloved Ireland. Today we discussed how those Irish immigrants impacted Menasha, the U.S., and the world. You may not know this, but Ireland benefited from the American Irish immigrants too. Remember, 1845, the country was governed by the UK Parliament from London, poor, and lost half its population. The American immigrants supplied financial and moral support back home. Those immigrants helped shape the Irish identity and kept the desire for Irish independence alive during those difficult post-famine decades. In a blog, Irish Ambassador Daniel Mulhall said on December 3rd, 2018, the continued existence of an Irish-American identity is a legacy of the Irish famine and its aftermath with the formation of an extensive Irish community that was both determined to assert its position within American society and also to retain its affiliation with its ancestral homeland. In 1970, Irish historian Gerodo Toohey summed up Irish America's influence on Ireland best. The struggle was destined to be a protracted and at times a frustrating one. But the sons and grandsons of the famine exiles were determined to see it through to the end. Only then could the accusing ghost of the Black 47 be finally laid to rest. Like the Americans and Scots before them, the Irish gained independence from Britain 80 years after the famine on December 6, 1921. Thank you, America. Thank you, American Irish immigrants. Thank you, Menasha.